I just love everything we're talking about. Like, to me, this gets at what I think Kanye's really been building towards album by album is really holding on to this idea that like you can't deny yourself. Like all of this mix of energy we're hearing on the album, like there's good and there's bad. Like none of it's really bad in quotes. Like it's not. It's all part of who Kanye West is. Sometimes he is egotistical. Sometimes he is antagonistic. Like he's just human, and he's not afraid to like present himself as being human on this album. The point is not to just show yourself in this light, you know, that you're changed. You're honest about yourself, and you show how hard and arduous the journey to finding that change can be. And that's why, like, God, the song's 23 albums, like, holy shit, this is exhausting. But to show that over the course of 23 albums, to spend the first 10 songs of the album really honing in on this idea that like there's chaos in your life and and it's consuming you, like that's important for art. Like it's important that it took us this long to get to 24 to start to see this change start to happen.
Yeah, and that's something that Kanye has talked about at times over the last couple of years. Ever since the Jesus is King period, he started talking about how he had been working for the devil, rapping for the devil. We have this GQ interview that we're going to return to a few times that came out. The interview happened at the end of January 2020, and the interview itself came out in April of 2020. So post Jesus is King, very early in the God's Country Donda process, right? Like Will Welsh, who wrote the article, talks at one point about hearing an early version of Wash Us in the Blood, right? And new music that Kanye was working on. And when Welsh asks Kanye about, let's talk about the music you're making, Kanye says, I was thinking of not rapping again because I rapped for the devil so long that I didn't even know how to rap for God. Right. So
Right.
there was already this idea in his mind of rapping for the devil versus rapping for God. He talks about how he used to drink during the day. And he says that he was in his office working on a Couture collection and there was some Grey Goose in the fridge and I was just going to get a daytime drink. And I looked and thought, devil, you're not going to beat me today. That one statement is like a tattoo. I haven't had a drink since I realized I needed to take it day by day, but I never owned up or was even told, hey, you're a functioning alcoholic. People have called me crazy, a crazy person. People have called me everything, but not a functioning alcoholic. And I'd be drinking orange juice and Grey Goose in the morning.
Yeah.
But he also said at another point of the interview, he talked about feeling like he could be Clark Kent. Welsh says, does the fact that nothing's ever really done slow down the momentum of everything you're creating? And he says, time and space are man-made constructs. That's my answer to that question right there. Art never fully explains itself, and art is never fully done. Me being normal, that's not even a true statement. You know what normal is to me? An act. I can act normal, and that's me as Clark Kent. But artists are people who have embraced themselves as a superhero. To which Welsh says, sometimes when I see you refusing to be Clark Kent in certain situations, I'm like, please just be Clark Kent for a minute. It will save you so much trouble, which is, I think, something all of us have felt at one point. I feel like there's a job to be unwilling to make compromise. I like when people don't have to compromise themselves to collaborate. Even as an artist or as a composer, I compose the strongest talents and push them to be the maximum version of their superhero. People spend one day with me and they're thinking about their own ideas outside of the box. If people spend years, they should be able to make it to the Super Bowl. To have blind faith is the ultimate confidence. Sometimes it could have felt like it was arrogant. And I think that the arrogance could have come from the fact I wasn't working for God, but I was working for my ego, which is like working for the devil. So I think Kanye's balancing some of those things here. This idea of ego versus letting go of ego, this idea of devil versus God. We've seen how many times on this album already people have talked about demons and angels, devil and God. And it comes up here again while also crescendoing several songs from now on Heaven and Hell. So I feel like Kanye in these interviews, if you start going back to his 2019, 2020, I don't think there's a 2021 interview, right? you'll hear Kanye kind of talk about that dichotomy a lot. And we've talked a lot about how Kanye albums tend to reflect the period of his life. Don't even tend to, they are reflections of that period of his life. So it makes sense to me that he's just kind of channeling that energy, not just on the song, but on this album, where you're having a lot of that confrontation of self and trying to see which energy is going to win out, which is a similar thing that we mentioned on Jesus is King when we did that season.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's not surprising at all. Like Kanye's connection with God, it's not like God standing there, like any human standing there. Like it's a spiritual connection. It's something that comes from within. You really can't do that until you've fixed yourself mentally and spiritually. Like you have to push yourself to that point, and that's a complete battle of yourself.
Yeah. And you have pointed out several times that you don't think it's as simple as doing things wrong and then doing things right. Mm-hmm. That there are times where Kanye feels justified in some of the intention and the anger, like thinking about Selah, right? Or Selah. Right. Or
spiritual
Closed
warfare.
on Sunday. Spiritual warfare, very much. That, and even some of the attitudes he's taking in the early portions of this album, where it seems he's standing up for himself, and you could view it as combative in a negative way. But even in this interview, Kanye says, "I feel that we all have sin, and when certain sins are worn more on our sleeves, it's easier for Christians who are not Christ but are human beings to be able to channel judgment at what they see in front of them." Which I think one of the key things there is that we all have sin, and certain sins are worn on our sleeves. I feel like there are some sins being worn on sleeves here. Yeah. But the other thing is, if anyone claims to be Christian, they're accepting accountability to other Christians, but people don't realize that Christians are loud, that we have a right to righteous anger, that Jesus flipped tables. They think that all of a sudden you believe in Christ, so we're not even supposed to speak up. And if we speak up, people will say, "Oh, you're being judgmental." And it's like, oh, now because I'm a Christian, I don't even have an opinion anymore. I'm a Christian, I still have an opinion, but my opinion is based on the word. So Kanye does take a stance there of, you're allowed to have an opinion, you're allowed to get upset about things, you're allowed to flip tables. So not every like table flip in quotes moments where you're emotional is necessarily a negative thing. But I do think if you chain enough of those together over time, you can see someone that's maybe gotten distracted by some things.
Yeah, it's funny because like that to me does sound like Kanye for a lot of his life. Like he was just in antagonistic mode for a while. He was pushing buttons. He just seems different to me than he seems now. Like he still has that energy. He's still Kanye West, and I think that's really important for Kanye. Like, don't deny yourself. Denying yourself is the worst thing you could do as a Christian. Like, you just have to find that balance. And I think that's what you're describing is that, you know, you can still have those moments where you flip tables, where you push buttons, where you go outside of what's expected, but you also do it with God in mind. You do it by the word of God. Like you're part of a bigger fight than yourself. Like you're doing something you believe is going to create good change in the world. So that's where it's kind of hard to see where Kanye's coming from, because you read the energy of something like Off the Grid or the energy of Believe What I Say, and it's hard to attach yourself to somebody like that, but you just also remember like that's part of being human. Like that's something Kanye's struggling with, and like that's something he can overcome. Like you could still go through those motions because you are being yourself. Like that's how you naturally are. But then what's on the other side of that? Like, how do you grow from that? How do you reflect on that? How do you meditate on that? That's, I think, of what a lot of the album's getting at.
Which is something we talked about in the Ye and Kids See Ghost seasons, is that the first 3 songs on each of those albums get at darker thoughts and darker actions. And they're not, I mean, they're a little more on the wrong side in that album, right? Like, the intensity of I Thought About Killing You, the intensity of Yikes, and then All Mine just being straight up like straight arrogance. And then you think about some of the goofiness of Fire and what's the song after Fire?
Fourth Dimension.
Is it Fourth Dimension? Is it? Oh yeah, I'm thinking of the sample on Fire. Then Fourth Dimension, where they're a little less thoughtful, Kanye and Cudi. than they are on the last three songs, right? Reborn, Kids See Ghost, Cuddy Montage. There's a huge difference in how they're approaching things and viewing things. But one of the key takeaways on both of those albums is that you can't fault yourself, or you shouldn't guilt yourself into, you need to accept that those are part of the process and part of the journey, right? So Kanye realizes on Ye that the dark thoughts, the dark experiences, the mistakes that he makes lead to the breakthroughs, which is something that he talked about with T.I. at the end of the year when T.I. flew out to talk with Kanye because T.I. was so upset about the Trump stuff. There's that interview where they're going back and forth, and Kanye talks about how when he says something out loud and gets the response from it, it's like the pressure that creates a diamond. It hones you, it helps refine your thinking, you get course corrected very quickly by the public. Mm-hmm. And that course correction can be that you double down on how you're feeling, like you feel even more strongly about it, or you feel like, oh no, I learned something. Like people taught me all of these things, even if they were critical and mean about some of it, like you still learn. And I think I lost track of my point, but
happens a lot in this show.
Yeah, there was something to that idea that Kanye was balancing on those albums, that he is aware of the fact that the negative aspects lead to breakthroughs and lead to positivity. And even on Kids See Ghost, you have the moments where you are going to step back at times. You're going to slide backwards. The negativity, the darker emotions are going to come up at times, but you just have to keep moving forward, right? That's what the last portion of Reborn gets at, is the dark thoughts returning, the storm returning, but you keep moving forward and you get out of it. So I feel like we're seeing Kanye continuing to channel that energy and really come to terms with all of that on Jesus is King, and now here, where he's refining the fact that there are these initial ways of reacting to things and then improved ways of reacting to things, which you look at how he's talking to Drake in the early portion of this album versus how he's responding on Pure Souls. You look at how he's talking to Kim in the early portions of this album and reflecting on the relationship, to how he reflects on it in Lord, I Need You and Come to Life. And there's just these differences, but that's because the second portion of this album is Kanye growing from the first portion of this album.